Hello, and a very, very warm, but I hope not too warm, given how hot it is in the UK at the moment, very warm welcome to our first in-person, in the building day of RIDE since just before lockdown. And of those of you who were here the last time we were in this room for RIDE, it was just before we went into the pandemic. And who knew how our world was going to change? It's been fascinating watching it. It's been a fascinating time for those of us working in online and distance education. And I think the programme that we've had this week so far with our first 2 days, which were entirely online, has really picked up on some of the considerable challenges and issues and successes that we've had over the last couple of years. But what's also been fantastic has been the way in which our community of distance and online educators and practitioners and researchers has been able to pull together new innovation, but grounded, very strongly grounded in what we know about effective online and distance education. And it's wonderful to see the way in which research and practice have integrated throughout this conference. It's also been really exciting that many of the key challenges, such as climate change, decolonisation, policy and practice, have been picked up throughout the week so far, our 2 days. So I'm not going to speak for more than a couple of seconds now, but just a couple of practical things. First of all, oh boy, it's so lovely to see you in 3D. And people have already said to me, that I'm taller than they thought. Probably a little wider as well, but there we are. Thank goodness for biscuits. And also, it's wonderful to have an audience with us online, and a very warm welcome to our international audience who are both here and with us online, and a warm welcome to everybody in the UK who's with us either here or online. So that's me over. Just 2 practical things. Toilets, go along that way, and either corridor through the double doors, there are toilets. You'll see the signs for those. We're not expecting a fire alarm, so if the fire alarm goes, we will depart the building through the main doors, and then we congregate in the car park outside Senate House. So that's the practical stuff, and I've not had to say that online for 2.5 years about where the toilets are or about where we go if there's a fire alarm. Amazing. Let me hand over, because I keep talking because it's so lovely to talk in person, but I'll stop now. Thank you.
I'm a fair bit shorter than Linda, so hopefully you can hear me. Wow, Linda, really is amazing to see actual people. So hello, thank you all for coming. You all have legs as well, but who knew? My name's Sarah Sherman. I'm a Code Fellow, and I'm also the director of the Bloomsbury Learning Exchange, which takes place kind of around this area of London, but obviously, like everything else, remotely and by distance as well. It gives me really great pleasure to be introducing Tim Neumann as our first keynote presenter today. Tim is a friend, a colleague of 15+ years, possibly longer, and a highly regarded professional in the EdTech sector in the UK and beyond. Tim is a lecturer in education and technology at the UCL Knowledge Lab, as faculty learning technology lead for the Institute of Education, UCL's Faculty of Education and Society. He's also the head of the IWE's Learning Technologies unit. So what Tim doesn't know is not worth knowing about. Tim's keynote is entitled The Concept and Practice of Hybrid Delivery, Past, Present and Future. Tim's going to identify pathways for thinking about hybrid to help focus on its purpose and what might lie ahead for us next. So Tim, over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. And well, it's great to be back and see so many people in real life. Isn't it fantastic? And you've spoiled the title because we had a little quiz on Twitter yesterday to guess what these symbols might mean, but that's the title, if you can follow on. And Linda has just said that we have innovated in the past few years along the lines of being grounded in research and what we know. I am going to mildly challenge that in a second, because we actually have forgotten a lot of what we used to know, but we'll come to that. So let's move on. I'm structuring my talk in these 3 sections: past, present, future. And let me just start with opening remarks on what we've gone through in the past 2 years in terms of hybrid delivery. Well, firstly, when I was invited to this talk, I was given a list of topics that I might want to talk about, and I chose hybrid delivery. And 2 days later, I immediately regretted it because I was invited to events on that topic, which sounded much more insightful. But having been through these events, I'm talking about something completely different, so no overlap or few overlap here. So over the past 2 years, hybrid suddenly became a hot topic, and it landed on all of our agendas. And for those of us who've done this for decades, it was actually quite exciting to see. It was almost like seeing a bunch of super excited puppies and who latch onto a new topic and are totally excited about it, get their teeth in, licking all your faces and what these nice little puppies do. And I do not mean this in a disrespectful way, quite the contrary, in a kind of an endearing way. Everybody likes to look at puppies. It gives us a warm feeling, doesn't it? But it is effectively, it was a situation where people got together showing all characteristics of a community of practice. So we suddenly had a huge bunch of people who were going through a very similar thing, introduction of hybrid, together with the same similar state of knowledge, many of whom were new to the topic. Hence, we really had a proper cohort going through it together from different stakeholders, different departments, academics, professional service, and so on. And that was really exciting. But is it innovative? Well, I've just said some of us have done this for decades. So hybrid as a concept is actually not innovative at all. And we'll take a look at the past now. And I've picked 3 examples that show how in the past we have talked about stuff like that. Yeah, let's move on. First example, 1987. The HD version of the 3.5-inch floppy disk was introduced, the one with the hole in the bottom right corner there, doubling the capacity. That was also the year when Rick Astley had his hit, what was it? Never, never gonna let you down or so. But never gonna give you up. Yeah, that's the one. So, and that will leave you for the rest of the day. I can be cruel. So in a way, you've been rickrolled now. But in that year, there was a paper written by Malcolm Tide, who was actually down the corner, just around the corner in Birkbeck. And he wrote about mixing face-to-face and distance education. 1987, the World Wide Web didn't exist yet. So we didn't really have online technology to facilitate that. But he mentioned there's an unreal demarcation in higher education between distance and face-to-face providers. And so there's a strong case for diversifying methods. And the last bit is interesting. In the interests of expanding opportunities for students and increasing the effectiveness of teachers. So Malcolm has provided proper purpose for mixing face-to-face and distance education. Whereas in the past 2 years, our purpose was mainly extrinsically motivated. There were external factors that pushed us to this. By choice, we probably wouldn't have gone down this route. But however, we have done so and we have seen values of hybrid delivery. And now we kind of need to find the true purpose. But for that, we just need to look back 35 years, because there we've written it. And in that paper, that's really a highly readable piece of work, because Malcolm has analyzed, well, actually relies on someone else who has analyzed all the characteristics for face-to-face education and distance education, and with tips how to mix these. So all the knowledge is already out there. And if you read this paper today, it is so relevant to what we do today, because we come to the same conclusions. Let's move on. 1998. So just some stuff that emerged in that year. There was a paper, Lechman et al. From engineering education, who wrote about a case of hybrid synchronous and asynchronous learning models. And in their case, they have sort of invented a model to address these three distinct groups: traditional on-campus students, students at a distance who join real-time via internet, and students who take the class asynchronously. That is the definition of what some people call high flex, or I've heard triple mode learning these days, which only emerged in the past years as a term. But 1998, people were already doing it and writing about it. And the final sentence, again, very interesting. It will revolutionize learning and teaching, no doubt. Well, it's taken 24 years, but it does over time. And finally, 2014, recent past, the year when HTML5 burst onto the scene. That's a technological significant development, because it enabled things like WebRTC, ease of use to connect with people synchronously through a browser without having to download everything and so on. So usability increased. And the Blended Synchronous Learning Project published its handbook. Again, a highly recommendable piece. I was normally on the International Advisory Board, but I only commented twice or so not much work for me. But this is a really good handbook. It has all the tips for hybrid delivery from multiple perspectives and so on. And in the past 2 years, we essentially have regurgitated everything, came to the same conclusions that Matt Bauer, who also was a visiting academic at the Knowledge Lab and has visited London on many occasions, when he and his team published his handbook. So highly readable, and this is effectively foreshadowing everything that we did in the past 2 years on the topic of hybrid. So I have a personal hybrid journey. I engaged with web conferencing before the first entry on this timeline, but I ran my first hybrid session in 2003, and in preparation for this talk, I went through my old emails. How exciting. So back then, I really did wild experiments, and in 2003, my first hybrid session was really giving it all. It was connecting 5 campuses and having then 40 or 50 online individuals logging into a system, and we ran a session. Yeah, back at that day, the fidelity wasn't great, and screen sharing was very choppy and so on, but it worked. And when I look back at the instructions I've given to the individual campus facilitators and so on, it was just one email, and then we did a rehearsal and we did it. So hybrid worked without too much faff back then. So what has changed in all those years? Really, conceptually? Actually, not a lot, but we have reinventing the wheels, because we sort of did not find what has been going on in the past. But things have changed. And these changes that have happened are mostly in the technology sector. And I will come to them a little bit later. But first, let's look at the present. And let's open Pandora's box. When we talk about hybrid, we essentially talk about modalities. You know, we have these 2 axes here, distance from the campus and the synchronicity of whoever logs in, and you can effectively then, you automatically have these 4 quadrants that you see there. The quadrant in the bottom left corner is often forgotten. What is asynchronous and local? That is, for example, when you access a library 24/7 and there's some resource that is only available in the library, you can choose your own time, but you must go somewhere. So that is not very often talked about, but it still exists as a mode. Now, this is a view from the program level viewpoint, but the reality is essentially more complex. So we can introduce third axes. I labeled it structural levels, so that the hybrid works differently when you think about the program level compared to the session level. But you can invent different z-axes or different labels for the z-axis. So when we try to define hybrid, it gets complicated, as the terminology says, because we have so many different words to talk about this, and hybrid only really stuck quite recently, also in the context of everyday life, because people are talking about hybrid work and so on. So yeah, hybrid is now the terminology of choice in a way. One question is, does the terminology actually matter? There have been huge debates on what shall we call it, and we need to agree on one common term and so on. I think that's a sideshow, this discussion, because the terminology is so vague anyway. And in our sector, we have over decades grappled with vague terminology, blended learning, e-learning, which merged to technology-enhanced learning, technology-supported learning, collaborative and whatnot. So we have used really fluffy terms, so that we almost always require to set a working definition and contextualize the terms in our local context and define what they mean. So lots of new terms have come up, like high flex and so on, which I don't particularly like because it's a trendy term. If any literature before 2019 that mentions high flex is about something chemical in West South America or so. Yeah, so it's kind of a brand, a marketing term, isn't it? So I much prefer to just call it hybrid as a qualifier, and then talk about programs, sessions, hybrid working, hybrid learning, hybrid delivery. Many people don't like the term delivery. I do. Many people think delivery is automatically associated to a transmissive approach to teaching. But actually, I see it as a term that defines the organizational viewpoint. So we can, when we issue instructions to students to organize their own learning, when we facilitate learning, then we deliver this facilitation, don't we? So the term delivery does not automatically mean this didactic approach. We can also deliver the instructions of how to work together and how to improve learning and how to get on with it. So let's get more concrete with real world scenarios. Let's look at UCL. This is a graphic that I made up because I was asked by our academic program office, the program administrators, to try and localize the terms, to define local terms. And yeah, that is where you hit the complexity, because you still have to think through hybrid. Even with the learnings of our past, you still have to contextualize it and find out what you can do locally, because what you can do depends on the services that are provided, the room equipment, the knowledge state and skills of your teachers, how well prepared the academic services are, and so on. So loads of factors. So and also registry. Because you're still dealing with a number of different groups who can come to campus, who cannot come to campus, who can log in at the same time or not. And you, in terms of registration, that's a logistical exercise. So you must define it at the local level, and you must have words for it. And this is what we came up with. That has resulted in a bit of a Twitter debate, which I did not go into because some people claimed I was ignoring something. But that was a view from the program level. And on the session level, this is blatantly plagiarized from Fiona Strawbridge, who is the head of digital education at UCL. This is what UCL did when we introduced hybrid learning, a pragmatic approach. We upgraded more than 300 rooms, and we had direct contact with a lot of staff, ran a lot of events, and came up with 3 options. Either do just this broadcast thing, streaming by a lecture capture system, or use Zooms and Teams with camera and mic upgrades, or bring your own equipment, which is what we did, or what I did in 2003.
So you've got about 7 minutes.
Plenty. So there were obviously also technical challenges, and the #1 technical challenge is audio. And I won't go through these things. There are a lot of links. You'll get the link to my slide set at the end, so you can click through. So if you were expecting practical tips, that is as far as I go. So let's look into the future. And I want to address 3 areas where I can make cautious predictions. I'm not a futurologist, but the developments are so obvious that I'm confident to make some mild predictions. So audio technology, if only we had a professional sound engineer to comment on that. Oh, hello, I worked as a professional sound engineer for 10 years. So in audio technology, we had a massive wave. The wave is so massive that it is effectively a paradigm change of how audio is handled digitally. And that is a true revolution. When we talk about innovation, this is where innovation is happening right in front of our eyes, only in the past few years, and it's only getting better. So what is evolving? I won't go through the details here, but microphones are evolving. The first microphone, 1876, Alexander Graham Bell patented something, and we continue to use the same principle until recently. Only with dynamic beamforming, we had new technology that was using somewhat different principles that were suddenly capturing dynamically sound from different corners. So microphones can these days detect where someone speaks and then only focus it. Combating the cocktail party effect. As humans, we can do this. We can focus on whoever speaks and blend out all the other noise. And now technology can do this too. And this is a game changer. And Fiona Strawbridge has said so since we installed ceiling microphones that do this. And these are really a game changer for capturing discussions in the room. Speech technology. Just look at the topics of the interspeech conferences that are happening with the support of big tech. I won't read through this in detail, but this is all the stuff that is directly relevant for hybrid, and not just hybrid, but everything where we use audio to communicate. It can even enhance our face-to-face environments. So this is in part driven by AI and machine learning improvements, but not exclusively. There are also statistical, mathematical methods of improving sound. But if I started to explain this, I think you're not really interested in this, and it would probably go over the head of a few people. So let's look at what that means in practice. In recent practice, look at the dates of the blog articles that I've linked from Zoom and Microsoft. It's just the past few months when Zoom has, for example, introduced gesture recognition. It has nothing to do with voice, but now you can raise a hand on camera and Zoom brings up the raise hand button, for example. But Zoom has been using AI for background noise suppression very effectively for quite some time. And Microsoft Teams is getting better at a very rapid pace. Just this week, they released features, they released a blog article where they talk about these features like taking reverberation out. that is what is revolutionary. We remove the acoustic effects that we have from the sound. If you told my sound engineer self back in the late 90s when I started out doing that, I would not have believed you that this was ever possible. Yet here we are, and it's only getting better. So we can expect changes, improvements, largely driven by AI. And when we talk about AI and machine learning, well, we must use AI responsibly. Just last week or this week, you might remember this case where an engineer was fired because he claimed AI was becoming sentient. So we are probably in a Hell 9000 scenario, but every AI researcher I talk to say, no, sentience. We are probably quite a bit away from that. Anyway, but AI can do a lot and does a lot where we need to pay attention. Now, if you listen to Mike Sharples recently, he had a really good example of an essay that reads very convincingly human. And he's using the same, he has used the same AI tool that I've linked below for the OpenAI jukebox, which generates music that has never been played in that. And it's full music, orchestras, bands, and so on. When you get access to the slides, click through and listen to the jukebox. It's really entertaining. And in this context, I have to point to my colleagues, Wayne Holmes and Kaśka Poraska-Pomsta, who are just releasing the Ethics of Artificial Intelligence in Education handbook. So they've just given us a summary there, and it's really vital, and we need to all be aware of that. And then on another project that we've done at Knowledge Lab is moving to online teaching and homeworking over the past 2 years. We are still publishing based on the data set, and we uncovered things, the impact on humans in higher education, and come up with some recommendations. So to close off, I'm almost finished. Third point, convergence of synchronicity. What do I mean by that? Well, that's a handful in terms of terminology. Well, there are a few convergences happening. For example, synchronized asynchronity. I talked about that in the context of an online Educa symposium back in 2007 or 8, where I suggested that web conferencing systems should get functionality where you can collaborate on a whiteboard and so on, but then also be able to edit what's on that whiteboard afterwards, which wasn't possible at the time. Now it's possible. If you look at all the whiteboard tools, from the Microsoft whiteboard to what are they called, Mural, Padlet, Miro, and so on, these are all tools that you can collaborate on in real time, but then you can take it away. It persists, and you can still change it and so on. And conceptually, that bridges the gap between synchronous and asynchronous, which was one of these axes in the hybrid continuum. And in terms of research, there's a lot of research happening in the online sphere, web conferencing, which is now translated to face-to-face. And I would like, that's my final point, I think, to mention my colleague Mutle Kukurova at the Knowledge Lab, who does really cutting-edge research. This is some outputs. I've linked the papers there for a learning analytics dashboard, both for teaching assistants and for students using Zoom Sense, an open source thing in development, which creates these nice graphics that tells you how people in breakout rooms communicate with each other, and also tells you how often the teaching assistant goes into these breakout rooms and what kind of interaction they have. Quite interesting, because it helps the teaching assistant optimize their interventions, and it tells the students where they can improve and how they can optimize their own learning. And he's now taking this type of research into the real classroom and observes group scenarios in the classroom by putting a camera and a microphone on each group table, and then the AI and the big tech, large computers and so on, analyze gestures, pick up moods of students and do emotional analyses and all that sort of sci-fi stuff. But it's not sci-fi, it's here, it's now, and we can already do it. Now, it's confined to research, it will need translation, but we are learning so much about it. One thing that Moodle, for example, has found out, a big component that we've never even thought about of what leads to better outputs is, for example, arousal. We need to get our students aroused. By arousal, but not too much, just a little bit. Too much arousal is damaging, but a little bit is needed. And what arousal in technical terms means variation of heart rate and changes in your skin resistance and that sort of stuff, just to be sure. So there's lots of exciting research happening at this moment where we still need to await some results. But with these dashboards, we are getting immediate insight into how communication happens, really, with a huge potential to draw conclusions about learning. So my final message is, I've presented some stuff from audio technology, from AI, machine learning, from the past and so on. What we really need is interdisciplinarity. We need to talk to each other, not just us in this bubble here, but to reach out to different disciplines, because the real innovation in the hybrid space at the moment comes from the technical viewpoint. And as I mentioned, it's only going to get better. It is increasing in pace, and we will see massive improvements even in the short term. In the terms of audio technology, that's probably bad news for all of the people who equip the rooms, because the technology that I've put in today might need to be replaced very soon. Well, not these ceiling tiles, because they hopefully have a longer lifespan. And these days they can be upgraded with new firmware and that sort of stuff. So you're safe there. But yeah, interdisciplinarity, let's all work together and look beyond our immediate circles. And that is effectively the message I would like to end on. And you can now look at my slides there. Thank you very much.
Rising up to the sunset quite yet. I'm going to pass to my co-chair, Philip, who's a question that's already come through for you, Tim.
Okay, thank you very much. So we do have the poll read for people to post questions, and they will come up there. Just as an aside, we can now think about the National Student Survey changing one of its questions to say something like, how aroused were you by your lecturers during your lectures? Question, what are the implications of your future analysis for the role of teachers? Where are we going to be as people who stand in front of classes or stand in front of cameras?
That's a good question. First, what I kind of forgot to say is in the move to a hybrid, as teachers, people have been picking it up really, really quickly. So hybrid is no rocket science. You don't need a three-year degree to engage in hybrid, but you do need some skill sets. And in terms of the future, what that means for us as teachers, I am pretty certain that we can expect more information about our learners and also about our teaching styles, insight into teaching styles, which can lead in professional development and such. And the very final example that I showed of the research that's currently going on is probably the best example for that. So as teachers, we have an opportunity here to get some information that we previously would only collect through surveys or through talking to people and so on. But now we are getting more and more into a situation where the technology can inform us about stuff that we even don't see. For example, when students go into breakout groups, we don't know what's happening in there, but the technology can tell us something in the future. So that can improve our interventions but it will never replace the teacher. I dare to say that.
Thank you. A couple of other questions coming in. Sort of terminological, or I'm not sure whether it is. Hybrid typically means transitional, that we are moving from something to something. Is that how hybrid is? Are we just seeing the evolution to some different endpoint, or is hybrid a steady state?
That's a tricky question and would probably need a very, very long answer, which we don't have time for. But to keep it short, I mean, first of all, the terminology is different, and we can expect that the terminology will change sooner or later. So I am not convinced that we will be talking about some of the terms that we use today in 5 years' time. And maybe hybrid will become one of these obsolete terms. In that way, it would be transitional. But what will be transitional is the mix of different modes along these two axes, or even more axes if we can identify them. So it's like these, was it Wilbur Schrem's media clock? When something emerges, it doesn't go away. And hybrid has emerged, you know, quite a long while ago, 35 years ago, and it's still here, and it's now increasing in pace thanks to the technology developments that makes it easier. So in that sense, I don't think the practice that is underlying what we call hybrid now is transitional, but the word may be.
Tim, unfortunately, we have run out of time in your amazing keynote presentation. What a keynote to start with on a day which is a hybrid session. Thank you so much. Tim, you're going to be with us for the rest of the day for the conference, right? So if anybody in the room has anything that they wanted to ask him as well, just grab him. He's quite tall, we can't miss him. Otherwise, we will get access to your slides, and there's lots there to follow up on. So can you please join me again in thanking Tim?